US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has confirmed that Israel has agreed to what he says is the American bridging proposal for a ceasefire deal in the besieged Gaza. Blinken says the ball is now in Hamas's court to accept the deal to bring the much-needed pause to the deadly fighting that has claimed over 40,000 lives. But for a discussion on this and a lot more, we are now joined in studio by Youmna El-Sayed. She is Al Jazeera's Gaza correspondent and has been on the ground since the start of the conflict to give us an idea of what life is like in Gaza. She is visiting us here in South Africa. Welcome to South Africa, Youmna, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Naledi. It's an honor to be here with you.
It's an honor to have you with us because, you know, I looked up some of your work and I realized that you were on the ground in Gaza right from the very beginning. Well, perhaps not the very beginning, because that would be quite a long time ago, right? That's a bigger argument. But from the moment on the 7th of October, when we saw Hamas then have that attack on southern Israel, you were there from the very beginning and have watched the escalation of hostilities ever since. I think let's talk firstly about what brings you to South Africa.
Well, let me just say that, yes, I have been there from the very beginning. I'm a resident of the Gaza Strip. I've been living in the Gaza Strip with my husband and my family for the past 10 years. So when this already started, when this genocide erupted or started, I was already there. Gaza is my home, it's the home of my family, and it is where we have been living and settling. Why I have come to South Africa is because since I have left the Gaza Strip at the end of December, I was forced to evacuate the Gaza Strip because it was the only choice that I had to keep my children alive. And since I left, I've been living with the survival guilt that I survived. I was able to leave, while many of my colleagues were not able to leave. Many people, many friends, many family members were forced to stay in this hell because they were not able to leave. And that survival guilt just kept on eating me inside, although I did it for the lives of my children. And I thought to myself, I did what I could do from inside Gaza. I stood in front of the camera for hours every single day. I went out to places, I risked my life, and I covered the events. I did stories about the people. I covered everything that the outside world needed to know at that time about what was happening in Gaza. But the needed action and support and change from the outside world, from the international world, towards Gaza, towards the people of Gaza, towards what's happening in Gaza was very little. It was not what is needed to stop an ongoing genocide. And that's why I thought to myself, I should be going to these countries, to these communities. I want to speak about Gaza. I want to speak about the people of Gaza, to the people of the international world in their own countries. And this is part of why I'm here in South Africa now.
Yeah, and I think it's the most important discussion that you're having with the world, and certainly with South Africa. And you know what we do sometimes is as we cover the war and the violence in Gaza, what we do is we'll count the numbers, right? We count the bodies. We say over 40,000 lives lost, and perhaps there's a sense that we're not quite grasping that this is daily lives. I mean, even if you look at the visuals behind us, these are buildings where people lived their lives, like you said, for 10 years, raising your children with your husband, and that has been taken away from you. If you will, to someone who was watching this discussion and doesn't understand that those people aren't just numbers, when shelling does take place, and this is a difficult thing to do, what do you see on the ground? I mean, recently we were talking about a soccer pitch where there was shelling and children losing their lives, right? And when the South African government approached the ICJ, our own legal representatives talking about the horrific images of bodies on the sides of the roads and the indignity of not being able to bury their parents. It's a difficult thing to do, but let us in, right? Is there ever a warning when shelling is on its way?
Well, first of all, I want to say that what we do see on TV to many people, it's very horrific, it's terrifying, it's a lot of horror, but it does not even reflect 1% of the reality of how terrible, how horrific the situation in real life is, the details of a missile or a missile falling on you, the sound, that terror, that fear among the children when they run to your arms, when they scream of fear, when you hear your windows shattering and breaking like that, when you hear the sound of explosion, when something could hurt you if it falls very close to your home. I'm just talking about in a lucky scenario where it hasn't hit your home. It just hit an area that's close. All that, adding to all that, if this missile or rocket falls on your home, those stones and rocks of that building falling on those fragile bodies of children. I used to go to homes that were bombarded, and I used to stand on top of them, feeling that I'm standing over a grave with people buried alive. To that extent, where you are standing and you can hear the sound of children screaming from down, and there are actually no tools, no equipment for the civil defense teams, which are very few people. It's basically the residents themselves using their bare hands to actually try to dig and remove those rocks and stones of the debris of the buildings that have been destroyed by those rockets, to bring out children. And then a child just comes out in front of you with a lot of blood, broken, their bones broken. They've either lost limbs, hands or legs, or completely lost their lives. You get to the extent, Naledi, where you feel that a child who has lost his life is luckier than that who has been injured. Because once they go to hospital, it's not just the suffering of that injury, it's the suffering of no medical care, no medication, no painkillers, no chance for him for anything to ease his pain. They live on a daily basis with the pain of those burns from those rockets. And I've seen children burned over 90% of their body. Only survivors, most of the time, where their entire families have been killed, and they just lie in those hospitals alone, scared, terrified, in pain. They have lost all kind of dignity for a human life. This is how life is for Palestinian children, for Palestinian mothers, fathers, elderlies.
Yeah.
You can't see that on TV. And not being there, and that's why those medical delegations that go, they're doctors. They're used to see injuries. They're used to do operations and surgeries and deal with all that kind of pain. But when they come out of Gaza, they're traumatized because they see people in the most horrific conditions, injured children, and the least right of having a painkiller, anesthesia for the surgeries is not even available.
Yeah, you know, I'm glad that you've given us a closer look at what things look like inside Gaza. Your message, I mean, you're in the country. I mean, we can talk a little bit about food and water scarcity and the resources that are needed. There's been discussions around, well, aid certainly in some cases has been donated, but it doesn't reach people, and that's been a really big talking point. What is your message now to South Africa? I mean, we've just gone into this new 7th administration. Before it, you had the Minister of Justice approach the International Court of Justice, having some success. But the question has always been for those in Gaza, they don't see that success. Now you've got U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying that Israel has agreed to this bridging proposal. I don't know if you're confident in that. Talk to us about that. But what do you want from the 7th administration of the South African government?
Well, the South African government has approached the ICJ. This step has not been taken by any other government before. It was a very important step. People in Gaza, yes, they do feel it, and I know that it has not brought a huge change or a rapid change or at once that the people in Gaza need, the civilians need, but on the long term, politically, I believe it's a very, very, very important step, position, and stance. And it has encouraged other governments, and this is very important, when we find recognition by other governments, other countries to Palestine, to the state of Palestine. This did not just come alone. This was also because of that stance, because we found even other governments that have stood up with South Africa to help in that case. This is very important. Some governments would want to take a certain stance, but maybe they did not have that, let's say, courage enough, like South Africa, to go on and to take that position, to stand that stance. And this was very important. This is historical. It has guaranteed that, yes, the international community does hear out and does stand against this genocide. They do believe that this is a genocide. It's not a war. It's not a conflict. It's a genocide. And there are proofs. There are proofs and there are evidence for this to be called a genocide. And now other countries are calling it that way. So yes, we need even more and more support. I think the Palestinian people in Gaza, yes, they know that this is a change. Maybe it did not bring an instant change in the reality right now, but I believe that it will in the long term. And it will guarantee that other governments would take the same or go into the same path. And this is what we really care about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for speaking to us, and all the best in your engagements here in South Africa. Al Jazeera Gaza correspondent Youmna El-Sayed, who is Palestinian herself. And I want to note this just as we wrap up. Of course, just in a few days ago, 2 days ago, in fact, in Gaza, Ibrahim Harab, a journalist, was killed as well in Gaza. And we, of course, need to note that the work that Youmna does as journalists on the ground also incredibly dangerous. Many journalists losing their lives. So thank you so much for joining us, and we do appreciate your time.